Welcome everybody to Booze Hour Cloud Edition today. Today I've got on a very special guest, Brian Ehlert from the NGINX business unit at F5, and we're going to have a cool conversation. If folks recall, a couple weeks ago we had on Luke Lehman, and both Luke and Brian are product managers at F5, and they have an interesting perspective on things and have a bit more of a, we can have a bit more of a behind the scenes conversation around how things look and how products come to be. So we can dip into some of that with Brian, but also just getting people up to speed on what's happened with NGINX since we've made that acquisition of that product and rolled them into a business unit F5. And if you've been keeping up to date on my newsletters that I send out, so you head over to darylandboo.com and you can sign up for the newsletter there. There's been a number of updates and features just constantly packed into the NGINX side. Not going to dive right into that right now because I'm going to save that for Brian, but lots of exciting things to talk about. Before we jump into any of that, though, a couple of things that I want to talk about. First of all, these are the last of these hologram stickers. So these are the last ones. If you just email me, boo@f5.com, or message me on LinkedIn, or you can DM me, or however you want to get a hold of me. There's tons of ways I make myself as available as possible. Send me a note saying subject line subscriber, throw me a mailing address, and I will pop these into the post, and you will get yourself a couple of these stickers. North America only, please. I have ordered more stickers, but they are not these hologram ones. They're kind of they're still exciting because they say Booze Hour on them, but they're just kind of plain stickers with just a white background on there. So there will be more to come, and I will keep everyone posted on that, but they should arrive soon. A couple other things. If you're watching via YouTube right now, and even if you're not watching via YouTube, you're watching via LinkedIn and you want to hop over to YouTube, you can see all this content. There's a subscribe button down here. So click on that and then you'll be subscribed. You can hit the bell and you'll get notifications as well. And then that way, I've mentioned this a couple times now, but I'm going to be on PTO. I was on PTO for a couple days, and so there's been a little bit less of the live streams for the last couple of days. I'll be on PTO next week, and so instead of having live streams, I'm going to record a piece or two of recorded content instead, and that'll just be on YouTube. So you'll want to head over there and hit subscribe, and then you'll see all that. Sorry. If you want to just follow me, you're not into YouTube, you just want to follow me on LinkedIn, head over to my profile, linkedin.com/in/boolam, and you'll be able to hit follow on my profile on there. And then you'll see when I go live on LinkedIn. But the other content is all on YouTube, and all the archives for all the stuff that we've been doing is on there as well. I did mention the newsletter. That's on darylandboo.com. If you also go on darylandboo.com, you can see an event calendar. And so I've been posting, I've been trying to keep that up to date with the future and upcoming guests as they get confirmed. There's guests that I've been talking to, potential guests that I've been talking to that are unconfirmed. So I can't quite post them on there. But you can keep an eye on that if you want to see what's upcoming. If you are watching on YouTube or LinkedIn right now, please say hi, leave a comment. If you're one of Brian's fans and you just want to send some love to him, leave a comment, and then we'll be able to post that up into the stream as well. And I will also mention that you can listen to this as well. You may already be listening to this right now, but if you're watching live right now, you can actually check out this in audio format. So I just posted up on the major podcast platforms. So Apple and Google Podcasts and Spotify as well. So with that, okay, I mentioned that I will be away on PTO in a little bit, so everybody can check out the recorded content on there. It's been a while since I put up any recorded content. Everything's been live, so I've been honing my editing skills a little bit on my personal YouTube. Everybody's welcome to follow that if they're into air fryers and drones, which is what I've posted about so far in personal finance topics. But excited to put together something edited back on this YouTube channel as well. All right. Gone through all that. All the exciting stuff is up to Brian at this point. So I will bring on, hold on here, Brian. Hey, Brian, how's it going?
Good. I love how you're talking about fans. I'm like, I don't believe I have
Hold
fans.
on. Here
But
we go. Look at this.
Yeah.
It's John Callalang, Brian fan. Who's Boo? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. You can subscribe and you can learn a lot more about me. We on our Monday, so we haven't had Brian on the Monday show. We should have you on soon on that. But and sorry about the dog if anybody can hear that. But we have a Monday show, and John has been on the Monday show, and we talk about ourselves on that. We stream for about a half hour. So I was saying to Brian before we jumped on here, the conversation could divert into surfing and kayaks or whatever else the subject might be. We'll try to keep her on track today, though. But if anybody wants to get to know Boo, it's on there. And we got Maurice as well. Cool. All right. So today, our subject that we wanted to talk about is NGINX. Now, we've had on Dan Edgar from the NGINX business unit as well on the product management side, talked specifically about NGINX App Protect, but we didn't really dial things back to the initial acquisition of NGINX. And I think people will find that interesting because, first of all, when that was first announced, I think it blew a lot of minds. Like I was watching Twitter, and a lot of people, there was different reactions. People were concerned from the NGINX side. Oh, this big entity is going to purchase NGINX and maybe they'll ruin it. There's a lot of people overall that were just really excited about it because they knew that how much it made sense. And then from your perspective, I think you've got a great perspective because you're on the inside of all of this and you were working on something. And I think this is all public information because it's been talked about on shareholder calls before. So it's not hiding anything, but you were actually working on a project that was now what's become NGINX controller, right?
Well, yeah, I would say sort of. So John's watching. So it's interesting the way this whole thing played out because yeah, we were working on an internal project, something actually very, very similar to controller without going into its details. But we were actually busy training the field staff at the time when the announcement came out. And we were doing training sessions, and we had literally just gotten ready to break for lunch, and the announcement came out, and all of a sudden everybody's like, what's going on? Everybody's looking at their phones and they're bringing up articles and everything and everything else, because there was probably literally nobody on the product team, nobody in the room knew that this whole thing was going on with NGINX at the time. So we're all sitting there looking around. We're like, okay, we've been training people. We know there's product overlap with what we're doing and what NGINX is doing. We're like, okay, what does this mean for us? Needless to say, we went on with the training that day. We finished it, and then we're all kind of what's next. It took a lot of time internally for things to settle out, for us to kind of unwind what it was. I mean, it was definite that at the leadership level they had sorted out that F5 had this kind of now it's a marketing message, this whole code to customer, but internally we had talked about that for a long time. There's this whole focus on applications. And this direction to get involved more on the software side of things. So when you look at NGINX, and NGINX is a big word. I can't tell you how many times somebody throws NGINX out at me and I'm like, well, are you talking about this thing? Are you talking about that thing? Are you talking about the company? Are you talking about the product? It's just even this week. So Datadog Dash is happening this week, and I spent the day in the booth yesterday, which I will tell you, virtual conferences are weird. I'm just going to say that right now. Virtual conferences are really strange. Delivering delivering anything at a virtual conference. It's like you're just kind of talking. You just kind of set it up and you go and you like wait for chat. You're not unusual or fundamentally different than what we're doing here. But at the same time, I'm not really talking to anybody. At least this time, at least this way I can act like I'm talking to you. Even though I realize there's other people there. But anyway.
Yeah.
So this is something I actually go through a lot internally. So we talk about NGINX, and I kind of just gave kind of a top level brush at, because I'm not one of the executives, right? I can't go into the deep details of why they decided to do this. But at the same time, it has been a very interesting ride for those of us that are inside the company. So all of us that were working on this internal product, and the product name actually got leaked at one point in time, right after we were right after the announcement. All of a sudden, there's some news article that shows up, and they leaked the name, and we're like, what? How did anybody even know what the name was? I'm like, half of the people on the team didn't know what the heck the product name was going to be. And I'm not going to go into that because I personally didn't like the product name. But anyway,
I recall. I don't even remember the product name, but I recall I didn't like it.
That's okay.
It's okay because it didn't come out. So, well, unless they reuse the name,
it didn't come out. So it really didn't matter. Now on the plus side, we learned a lot from what we did there. There was quite honestly. So when you think about when you think about software, and you kind of like set a whole bunch in motion for me when you, as you did the long intro here. So I'm just kind of rolling stuff through my head at this point in time. I've got some gray hairs. If you can't tell, I grew up in IT back in the early 90s. I started in IT. You know, it doesn't sound that long ago, but it was way back with NT351.
Wow.
It was way back with NetWare. I started, actually, I go back farther than that, in college in the kind of the end of the 80s, when I had an email address way back when college students didn't have email addresses. I mean, there was a point in time we didn't have email addresses. Usenet News was the thing. We had to go out and connect out to servers. NGINX out at the University of Denver was where I used to go for Usenet News, because that was how I could access it. And a few other things. So okay. So I've got a little bit of history there. I've worked in healthcare, finance, online retail, the mail order contact lens company. That was a really interesting part of my history. And what can go sideways when an email campaign actually succeeds and the guy running it doesn't actually tell anybody in the company that he's actually going to send out an email campaign, and you spend an entire night sitting in front of the web server because you had just gotten the company online like 3 months beforehand, and nobody can place an order. And you're sitting there at the server, and I remind you, we had well, we actually had two web servers at that point in time. Midnight that night, I finally learned that he had sent out an email marketing campaign. He anticipated his good bar was 10%, was 10% click through, and they hit 40%.
Oh wow.
And I had like no tools in front of me, so I finally had to limit the number of people that could come through so we could get some orders. I mean, this was early days, nowhere near the scale that people try to function at today. Now I'm trying to remember where I was heading with this, but you know, that's the way I've, you know, some of these things go. I spent some time at Citrix. Actually, that was kind of fun.
Oh.
In R&D division. No, it did not involve NetScaler. I did everything on the other side. Some time in community as well. Back when I was a Microsoft MVP, but that I don't have to worry about that anymore. That's actually a good thing. Sorry for any of you that are still MVPs. And as Daniel says, Robert broke it, and that's actually our current state of affairs. So when we get back to things that are happening on the NGINX side, I started to talk about NGINX as a product. NGINX is an interesting place in the portfolio. When you look at F5 and you look at the history of big hardware and big IP and everything else, and then you look at the big hardware moving to virtual appliances, and everybody's done this. I mean, this isn't unique to F5. Everybody moved into virtual hardware, but it's still an appliance kind of thing. It's still, you still treat it like an appliance, you still manage it like an appliance, and you still have a few other things. Well, NGINX, and I'm talking about the data plane component, right? That everybody thinks of. It's like the most deployed web server out there in the world at this point in time. There is so much traffic that runs through an instance of NGINX in one way, shape, or form. It's insane. But it can be a web server, it can be a reverse proxy. Those are the two things that most commonly get used for the open source product. And then it can also be a Kubernetes ingress controller. Okay, that's also there for the open source product. We move into NGINX Plus. Okay, so how do you take open source and how do you monetize it, right? So you add features to it. You put support contracts behind it. You do some other things. So we think of NGINX Plus. So we think of now API gateways. So API gateways are a thing. We think about taking that reverse proxy idea and actually turning it into a full-blown load balancer. So we think of more of that ADC functionality, but in a much lighter footprint than what you have going on with a virtual appliance. And then we get back to the project that we were working on, and NGINX controller, and how we rectified things. What we were working on did not turn into controller. It's actually kind of interesting. Controller was already a product. Controller had already been out in the market. Controller had actually already been rebooted once in its lifetime. And we rebooted it the second time. We took some of the things that we were working on internally, and we took some of the things that controller already did and controller already was, because we had to keep this product going. So it's a little different. When you're building something new, you can make mistakes. You can do the dirty things. You don't have to worry about certain things so much. But when you're working on, but when you're suddenly thrust upon this product that you're looking at, it's like, okay, we want to do all these things with it, but it's over here. How do we move it forward? So when you think about product from that perspective, it's like, okay, so we've got to keep all this functionality. The engineering teams, they want to rewrite everything. They literally want a clean slate. They want to totally write new code and start from scratch. And it's like, oh, okay, you can do that. How long might it take you to do that? We get into time frames. But so to kind of go back, so NGINX controller today is a mashup of what we were building internally. We had this notion of application centricity. We had this notion of self-service. We had this notion of aligning with the way the customer does things, aligning with the way the customer has divisions with their teams inside their companies even. So I don't know if you've gone into controller at all here or not, but we do within the product. We've built some we've actually built a whole bunch of scenarios around safety. So when we look at, I mean, you can look at controller as a way just to bubble up metrics about NGINX. And since lately I've been focused in the ecosystem space, there's a ton of different ways to bubble up metrics about NGINX. Like I mentioned, this week I'm focused on Datadog. So Datadog has agents, we can bubble up metrics about NGINX. Splunk has agents, we can bubble up metrics about NGINX. I mean, we've literally got a whole bunch of integrations that have existed out there isolated to the data plane. But at that point in time, we're still managing things. We're still managing discrete machines. We don't really have the abstract notion of, well, they relate to a component of our application. They relate to a particular application. We know what data center they're running in, but do we have any other logic that we've built around that data center constraint? So it's a lot of that higher level stuff that we've brought into controller to kind of extend the notion of managing NGINX and managing configurations within NGINX. Because I know a lot of people, they start with NGINX open source, they manually manipulate NGINX configuration files, nginx.com files. Great, perfect. We have a number of customers that come and they're like, okay, that's fine. I have this fleet, and now I'm going to say fleet in a small way. It's a little fleet because they start with 1 instance, they move to 5 instances, they move to 10 instances, and then all of a sudden it becomes kind of burdensome to start to manage these instances and all these little individual configuration files. And then we start to get into different ways that customers deploy. So they might deploy, they might look at NGINX as a huge reverse proxy, replace load balancing functionality with NGINX. And then they're looking at it as a large machine. Okay, now they start to think of it as an appliance. It's a very large, long-lived machine within their infrastructure. So they end up with these hugely complex configurations. I mean, we have one customer we've been working with. They literally had over 1,000 lines in their NGINX configuration file, and wow, just to create a single edit to allow a change in the data path or allow a change in an application, created a fear of fragility. So that they literally were afraid to make changes. So you get into, okay, so instead of doing that, because NGINX is so light, let's now start to look at, we have many instances, okay? We still have some load balancer, we still have some firewall in front, but now we want to have many instances that we can still have the manipulation capabilities of the reverse proxy capabilities, so that the development team can do all the things that they need to do. They can change the paths behind the scenes and do everything that they need to do. Ops can manage that. The developers can manage that. It all depends on the customer. But now we start to have a set of instances per application. Okay, so we get a little smaller. Well, they can have smaller machines. They can have smaller instances. They can scale them out. Oh, well, and NGINX can also load balance and share state between those instances of NGINX. Okay, that's another one. That's another one of those plus features. So there's key value pairs that get shared across. There's state that gets shared across, and there's a few other things. So you get into this, as you can imagine, the complexity just kind of grows of what can be accomplished with this little data plane product that started as a super fast web server, right? By these guys in Moscow that actually built this thing to begin with, and it's just kind of grown in capabilities over the years since it started into where it is today. And kind of all these features I've touched on, you kind of wonder why. Well, why wasn't somebody like F5 interested in this sooner? because of all these capabilities and because of all these use cases. But yeah, it's a host of very different things as we've come into this. And I mentioned earlier, and I grew up in the IT trenches. I was in IT for a decade, moved over to software, and I've actually been in software for a decade before I ended up in F5. So I was an IT person in the trenches, and then I was a test engineer in the trenches, and kind of grew into product management where I am today. And today my focus on the team is actually in the external integrations with controller. So as we start to focus on pipelines, as we focus on products like Ansible driving controller, as we focus on products like controller pushing out to Datadog, which is a beta feature that I'm talking about right now, as we talk about controller pushing out to Splunk, which is another data feature that I'm talking about right now. As I talk about the future of controller being able to trigger webhooks, is another thing on my roadmap that I want to make sure that I realize. So for the scenarios that we want to make real, I didn't grow up in the networking world. I always had a network guy to lean on when I was in IT. Even the day he tripped over the power cord to the core switch within the data center, and I will honestly never forget the look on his face as we were walking behind the rack, and I heard a noise behind me because he said something, and I turned around, and he had this blank look on his face, and I'm just like, "What did you do?" And he just like looks down, and I'm like, "Oh my God, that was the core switch, wasn't it?" And he just nods slowly, and I'm like, "Quick, plug it in. We'll hide. The phones are gonna ring like mad in a minute."
Maybe no one will notice.
Maybe no one. Let's see. We were working at a financial institution at that point in time. Needless to say, everybody noticed.
One thing that you kind of highlighted there too, like with you working on external partnerships, since NGINX being brought into F5, I can see from my purview, and so you probably see even more, like just so much investment going into NGINX, adding more people into the team, and then that allows you to be able to focus on those external, the ecosystem around it, whereas a lot of that stuff would have been community, and a lot of it probably still is community driven and community developed, whereas now we can actually have F5 resources work on some of those integrations, albeit some of it's more on the controller side, so there's a commercial aspect to it, but we're still contributing back into the open source project with lessons learned as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a lot of community stuff that goes on. So the open source product is chugging along. That continues to advance. There's and when we say ecosystem, there's a couple different aspects to ecosystem, right? There's partners with the business, right? So when we talk about certain relationships, which I'm sure customers realize these things happen, but it's not until you're on the inside that you really understand how they happen. So you've got a motion you can do with a partner. So when you sponsor an event, there's a quote unquote partnership there between companies. It was the same thing when I worked at Citrix. We were our team was all focused on Microsoft, so we would always be in the forefront of integrations that we're working there. So for me, this really isn't that different. But there's a couple different aspects to involving contributions. So there's the open source side, which is the company contributing to some open source project. Or so we might use libraries under the hood, right? We might use things under the hood, and then we contribute back to changes or to alterations that we've had to make that benefit the community. That's one way. There's just maintaining an open source product, which is out there. And then there's always those decisions around, and now you get into the difference between pure 100% open source products and open source products that have some sort of company behind them. So when you think of kind of a Red Hat, right? It's an open source thing, but there's actually a company behind it. You pay for support, and you pay for a few other things. You think about what happened to Zen Server in the Citrix days. Oh, the stories I know there. If you think about if you think about things like NGINX and whatnot, there's always a choice in what do we put into the open source to maintain the product and to keep it going out in the community, because we all do this, right? So we go out, we troll, we search, we troll GitHub, we look for projects and open source products. We're like, oh, there's this really cool thing, I can use it. And then you start to look at the project and you're like, oh, nobody's maintained it for 3 years. I don't know if I really want to use that thing or not, right? So you're always making this judgment call on whether or not there's actual community involvement behind it. Or then it's like, well, is it community contribution or is somebody maintaining it? Well, at least somebody's maintaining it. Can I get help from somebody if I've got problems, if I have configuration problems? So you get into that, and actually, and NGINX is actually really interesting because it's F5 is very formal. F5 support channels are really formal. NGINX, we still operate like the small company that NGINX was, where they came from. So when F5 acquired NGINX, just the controller team was like, I think it was like 25, maybe 30 people at the most. It's kind of escaped me, but we as the team that were sitting on the F5 side working on this special project, we were like 100 people. So they're like, oh, we acquired this thing. You're going to work with these people on this other team, and oh, by the way, you can't talk until the deal actually finalizes and everybody signs off on it from a marketing perspective. That was the longest 3 months that we have ever that we have ever went through, because we're like, oh yeah, you're going to be working together with these people and start making plans, but you can't talk to them because the sale hasn't been finalized. You can't talk to them till the sale's actually finalized and all the legal documents are taken care of. So you just get into this strange state of affairs. But anyway, back to the community stuff. We also have things that we put out there that we maintain. So Ansible roles, for example, is actually a good example of this. Daniel, who's hanging out here, and Alessandro and myself, we maintain a set of Ansible roles for NGINX and controller and NAP. We're the people that write them and maintain them, and we spend basically company resources putting them out there. We will take feedback. So the NGINX role has been around for a while. It's been around for a few years now, and they actually have a pretty good amount of contribution back from actual users. Our roles haven't been out there that long, so we don't have a lot of feedback back. But I do have some really good SEs that are out there that hopefully some of them are listening, and I'm like, don't stop creating merge requests. So we can get those capabilities in there. But that's something that we build. That's basically it's something in the community that's certified by the company versus something that the community has kind of done on its own. So if you start searching around NGINX as the data plane, you will find blog articles, help articles, gists. You will find all kinds of stuff that goes back years. The community is huge, and the community is everywhere. Just because NGINX, the open source data plane product, has been around and has created such a mind share, and it gets pulled in. But there's so much community help out there. I mean, go to Stack Overflow and do a search for a little while, just like you do for everything else, and you'll find all kinds of stuff. So, and you'll get into that, but ecosystem stuff, we think about it. We think about it differently. So I'm a little pragmatic about it, having been in the industry for a while, because it's like, well, what do I want to do? So I mean, there's a business reason to build integrations, but at the same time, it has to do something that the customer wants, and it has to deliver something that the customer wants. And early on at the intro, you talked about a little bit of insight into product and how things happen in product. I don't worry about the marketing side of product, which is nice. I get to worry about the capability side of product. So it's like, what are the actual features that mean something? So the integrations, like I say, I'm focusing on control. We mentioned Ansible. That's another one. People keep talking to me about Terraform integration, and I ask a bunch of questions every time somebody does that, because I'm like, okay, so that makes a lot of sense in this sense, but does it make a lot of sense in this sense? And I'm still waiting for the person to convince me that Terraform and controller make sense. So if anybody wants to convince me, and Terraform and NGINX totally makes sense, 100%. But Terraform and controller, somebody still has to convince me of that one. So you get a little bit of that on what goes on in product, as well as there's a little bit that comes from our gut and comes from our experience, right? We talk to customers. We talk a lot about taking customer feedback. Having both been a customer and now on this side, the hardest, the absolute hardest thing is listening. And I'll say this all the time, but trying to figure out what the person that's telling you something is actually trying to accomplish. Not necessarily the implementation, not necessarily the technical details as to what they've done and the problems that they've had, but what are they trying to accomplish? Because we're always trying to take this small example and say, okay, can we take this small example and can we make it a little bigger and make this kind of a universal solution for everybody? And then we're always trying to say, okay, well, that will work for this customer and this customer and this customer and this customer. Okay, that actually answers a few discrete problems with one thing. So we try to look at things in kind of a totally different way. We don't necessarily focus down on the details of particular things when we think about it from the product side. And then there's of course the evangelism side. Everybody gets how the evangelism side works. I won't even go into that. But yeah.
John leaves a note here, and I think he's referencing your previous challenge of looking at Terraform for controller. So him and Vinny will work on that there.
All right, I will challenge Vinny to get me on that one, John. So just so you know, I will. Vinny and I spoke a lot in the pre-controller days. So,
no, nice. Very cool. I think we're we've gone a bit over, but that's okay because there are no rules on Booze Hour. So what I think we should do is probably have you on one of the weekly updates, the Monday show, and just get to know Brian a bit more on there, because I don't think we were able to dive into that enough, and pick apart a couple bits of your history there. And I think it would be cool actually to, hold on. Vinny just chimed in here. It's done. It's working right now, but you're not wrong.
And there you go.
Fair enough. Yeah, maybe that would actually be an interesting chat for another booze hour, is running through some of these ecosystem partnerships and what they look like with controller, because I think that's the conversation that has come up with many of our customers, is how does this fit into everything else? And they start listing off all the other tools that they're using. And yeah, we like to think that F5 and NGINX are kind of the centerpiece of a lot of infrastructures, but we got to realize that there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Oh.
I've been criticized internally just because of the nature of some of the things I'm trying to do for customers. And it's been interesting. They're like, well, what do we do this thing in the product? So why do you want to do that thing? And it's like, I want to do that thing for the customers. It's like, yeah, great, you have it in the product, but the customers are over here right now.
Yeah, fair enough. Cool. All right. Well, let's end it there. There's way more to talk about. So I think we could go on for a few of the episodes like this and bring on some of our friends like Vinny and maybe some of our friends from Datadog as well to have a chat, which would be great. All right. Thanks a lot, Brian, for jumping on. Great to have you on, and hopefully have you on for a couple upcoming episodes as well.
Sure.
Cool. All right. Thanks, folks. I'm going to roll the outro. All the stuff, please hit subscribe down here, sign up for the mailing list, do all the things to follow the content. Newsletter is cool because I have turned that into, or run that on the managed email system now, so I can put a little bit more focus on that. You can, if you are subscribed to the most recent, or you'll see in the most recent newsletter what I got up to this past weekend as well, since we didn't have a Monday update to talk about that. All right. Thanks a lot, folks, and we will see you next time. Thanks for checking this out today. If you're watching via YouTube right now, go ahead and click subscribe down below. Also click the bell for notifications. That way you will find out when we are dropping a new video or when we're going live. Also, there's darylandboo.com. If you head over to that, leave your name and email address, we will drop a weekly technical newsletter in your inbox every Monday. Also, this is available via podcast, Apple, Google, Spotify. Head over to one of those, hit subscribe, and you'll be able to listen to us in the car, on your commute, or during a walk or a run. Thank you very much, and we will see you next time.